Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm absolutely delighted to have Ben Rubin with me. Those of you who are based in the UK may well know his face already. Those of you from further afield, the US, Australia, all the other glorious places that you deign to come and spend some time with me from, may not. He works for an organization called the UK Column. They are trying to restore, in my opinion, faith in British journalism, in the integrity of British journalism, and try to give people, yeah, just restore some integrity to British journalism. So this is Ben, and he is. Well, I think he's a wonderful journalist. I think he's a wonderful journalist because he is forensic in his approach to following the money. But I also think he's a wonderful journalist because if you go to his own page, which I will, it's Rise UK, Rise UK.
RiseUK.substack.com, yes.
There you go. And we'll put the link in the video notes. But if you go to his own page and you see some of his more impromptu videos, you see a person who really, really cares about what's going on. Particularly, I was struck. I was watching in the UK. We had this really awful week where we legalized state-assisted dying and we decriminalized abortion up to birth. And that was pretty awful. And when you watch Ben's video about it, you can see that he really, really cares. So for those two reasons, because he blends those two characteristics, I wanted everybody to meet him. And I thought we would maybe just give him an opportunity to speak. And that opportunity, I'm going to lead in by asking you, how was it that you came to work for the UK column? And could you tell people who don't know anything about it a little bit about it?
Yes. Hello, everyone. And thank you for the lovely introduction. And I'm glad you appreciated those impromptu videos. I was doing basically, I was trying to work out what to do in my Substack, and I thought, well, I could just go live on it, and I'd never really done that before. I did a few live streams back in 2023, but then my old computer packed up and it didn't work, and then I haven't done anything on my own platform since then. And I just thought I'll just turn this thing on at 6 o'clock every day for a month and see what happens basically. And it was good. I enjoyed it. And I need to start doing that again. And that was actually one of the films that got the most traction that I've done, was the one
Mhm.
about that horrific week. I think it's called The Death Cult. So if you go to my Substack, you can see it. Um, and I appreciate your comment on UK Column, who I've only joined very, very, very recently. They've been going for a long time before I turned up, and they have been. Yes, that's quite a nice way of putting it. Trying to restore the reputation of British journalism, which has been dragged through the gutter of late. Um, and
It's dreadful, isn't it? Because that was something that I think a lot of us felt that we could be proud of, was that in terms of actually representing ourselves to the national community and the international community, that we had some sort of integrity. We were a bastion of truth. Now, as you get to know more and more about everything that has unfolded, you realize that that's probably a misplaced interpretation of what we stood for. But anyway, if we're approaching it now, we're saying one thing. I was thinking, right. So in an introduction to you guys, I was thinking news in its purest form should really be an, or would you agree in with this, an unbiased representation of fact. But then that made me think if it is, then it's inherently humorless, which the UK column, to its credit, is not. And does that mean it's biased? And also, at this particular juncture in history, does that mean like is there a moral obligation to be biased because we're fighting a war? What do you think of all those thoughts?
So, well, look, facts alone gets a bit dry, doesn't it? And so we have to, and also there are so many facts. There is so much information, a cascade of information coming out on a daily basis, that it requires interpretation and representation ultimately. So I think our job is to provide a narrative that actually makes sense, that is based in fact and speaks to reality as or as close as we can get to that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot to cover at the moment, and we try to do it with a bit of humour because actually, yes, there's I think what's the phrase? If you don't laugh, you'll cry
Mm-hmm.
kind of situation, and the every part of the system that you look at, the kind of the institutional component of our society, whether that's in the political system, the economic system, or the cultural system, those kind of three pillars that society is built on, the whole thing has been completely taken over by a malicious entity. Ultimately, that's what we're looking at here. A lot of people talk about it as just incompetence, this sort of supposed inevitable decline of our living standards and the way that our culture is currently being degraded and undermined, and they just sort of view this as, oh well, it's an accident. It's like, no, it's not an accident. It's deliberate.
I
It's
think
planned.
sometimes the people have to come to it initially from that perspective. Like they see all this corruption and they have to, in the initial instance, think to themselves, this has got to be, greed, people taking advantage of the opportunity to make money, because that's something that's more easily understandable than that people are actually actively trying to uh, destroy their own communities, their own countries.
Yes, yeah. I mean, people lack the capacity to understand evil.
Hmm.
That's we've lost that. But greed is a function of that too, by the way. Like the way I always think about this is that and actually the lens that I bring into things when I'm analysing what's happening, I generally look at it through either power or money.
Hmm.
You know,
Yes, you
uh,
do. And
yeah,
I mean, how else to look at it? Genuinely,
yeah.
all
Well,
roads lead to Palantir or, but ultimately follow the money is a very sensible, it's always been a sensible bit of advice, but you really do try to do that, don't you?
yes. Well, money drive. It's about incentivization ultimately. Like people are either, and I think this is true for all of us. By the way, like we're all motivated to a certain extent by power or money or power. And they set the incentives up in order to deliver the outcomes in society that they're looking for but through those two avenues ultimately. And yeah, money's a big part of it because you can say, okay, well, who's going to benefit financially from this thing that's happening, and what's the outcome that they're looking for? And most of the time, pretty much all the time, that takes you towards the the motivation basically,
Mm.
and the culprits generally.
And so you could go back now to evil, which is where you were and what people ultimately, I think, find themselves coming to. But it's such a transition, a mental transition, I think, or at least I experienced it thus. I've seen corruption around me all my life, but I'd always attributed it to, like you said, to ineptitude or to individual greed that I wouldn't sort of qualify quite as evil because I don't know, it's a big step to take. So, how did you personally get there to a place where you would say, okay, this is evil?
Yes, well, evil. I mean, the main thing that kind of woke me up was what happened in 2020 and 21,
Mhm.
basically. And you asked me earlier how I arrived at UK column. Well, basically, I spent, and also you called me a journalist, which I still kind of struggle with, to be honest with you. I don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm just kind of reporting on things that I see. I don't know if that makes me a journalist, then maybe I am.
You are.
But I spent 15 years or so working in industry and as a business development person for consulting firms. So that involved a lot of analysis of the market, basically. We were doing bits of work with government as well, but I preferred working with big companies, or not just big companies, companies generally, because they're less bureaucratic and you can ring someone up and say, okay, we think we can help you. And then you can have a discussion and then you can agree on a piece of work and then you can sign that off and you can get moving. Whereas with government, probably rightfully so, it's a lot more controlled and bureaucratic and more difficult to actually establish relationships on a personal level. It's much more uh, locked down basically in terms of how they can interact with people operating in the private sector. And as I say, that's probably a
Mhm.
good thing. But that involved looking at the markets, all of the industries on a constant basis, reading the Financial Times every day, being obsessed with what was happening really, and I just had this curiosity to understand what was going on. I found it very interesting,
Mhm.
this huge, complex, global, sprawling, interconnected set of processes and machines that the and human teams ultimately, right, that drive our economic system. Where does it all come from? It's so easy. We live in such an advanced time. Well, in some ways we do. I think we peaked a while ago, and there's a strong case to be made that we're actually living in what amounts to a collapsed civilization right now. But all of the stuff that we have around us, it's so abundant and just so immediately available to us on a constant basis that a lot of people just kind of forget how
Mhm. How it all
this,
comes
yeah,
about.
where did it come from?
Uh,
Literally, you can put anything. Look at those books on the bookshelf behind you. Like, actually,
mhm.
how were those made?
Mhm.
You know, right down to the actual, just the raw, fundamental, basic components of what goes into making one of those things, like the paper. If you go back 150 years, not even that long ago, paper was viewed as still then as quite advanced technology. And in some ways it is advanced
Mhm.
technology. But if you say that to someone today, they look at you, like, what are you talking about? Because you can buy paper,
Reams of it
reams of
everywhere.
it,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
it's basically cost nothing.
Mhm.
And but I was always just kind of digging, like trying to get into like, well, actually, no, what's actually going on? How does it all fit together? And that curiosity then was useful because it allowed me to develop an understanding of industry and the markets and how all these different things fit together. And, that was useful in terms of establishing sensible relationships and conversations with people who worked in the companies and finding out how you could help them so that they would pay us money ultimately. That's what I was
Mhm.
doing,
Mhm.
to deliver consulting engagements. So we go in and say, we've got a problem we need to fix. We can't do it ourselves because we're too busy. We haven't got the skill set, whatever it might be. And we'd say, okay, well, we can come in, we can do a piece of work, we collaborate with you and we'll help fix it.
Mhm.
And that was what I was doing for a long time. And what you don't understand, and actually, and the vast majority of people don't get this perspective right. And I was very lucky in that I had a privileged view from the work that I was doing, but then also because of the time that I was working, in particular from around 2012 to around 2018.
Mhm.
I was working on basically the digitization of everything. It was the deployment of these things. Yeah. So basically, how do we take the way that businesses currently operate and transform that using these new technologies and migrate chunks of huge chunks of economic activity onto
Mhm.
these new technological platforms. And the iPhone came along, and Facebook came along, and Google, and kind of all these huge international technology companies that have really they were already around, but they really came to the prominence that they have
Mhm.
today over the past decade or so. And how does your business operate in this new ecosystem, this new environment? And these are big, big transformational questions
Mhm.
from a business perspective, but then also from the perspective of how that transforms human behavior,
Mhm.
the way that we interact with each other socially, the fact that we're now sitting here having this conversation and you're, hundreds of miles away, and this is all being done over the internet for
There was a massive
almost zero cost.
inevitability. There was a massive inevitability about that time, wasn't there? There was this sense that what you're describing was inevitable. When as soon as the
Yes.
technology became available, it was that we must use it, we will use it. You
Yes,
know.
it is happening. Yes, well, absolutely. And I was caught up in that and also helping to perpetuate that, to be honest with you, because that was the message that was getting fed into us. And everywhere, you go around and you look, okay, what am I reading? I'm reading the Harvard Business Review, and I'm reading the MIT Technology Review, and I'm reading the Financial Times, and everything that's coming at you is all kind of leading into this inevitable, as you say, transformation of the economic system, cultural systems, and society, and now today, currently, increasingly government by
Mhm.
these advanced technologies. And I was just operating in that world and doing that in various different types of consulting firms. There's lots of different types of organizations in that industry. But one of the most interesting ones, from the perspective of what I do now, was an organization that was called Seren, that specialised in digital interface design and human-centered design. So we had our own research facilities. We were doing lab-based testing with people to look at how they engage with different types of digital interface and brainwave tracking and all sorts of stuff, man. Like really
Wow,
like super
wow.
advanced.
It just doesn't seem like you at all because it's so soulless by comparison to the person that I perceive now. It's not soulless in the sense that it's fascinating, and it must have been fascinating, and I'm sure you're at the top of your game. It's just doesn't, you are you are different now.
Well, I've
Or,
kind of
or
I've kind of rejected it all a bit. Yeah. Well, so the people I was working with were top of the game. So it was a team sport, and I was very lucky to work with some very smart people. And so anyway, we were doing that, and also I should say as well that a lot of people in these industries, they're not evil people. We've used that term evil. I'm not suggesting for a second that everyone who worked in the industries that I was working in or doing the work on a day-to-day basis were evil or motivated to nefarious ends or anything like that, right? Because basically everyone's got their head down. They're doing the jobs that are available. They are curious and interested in the extraordinarily complex problem that is, how do we achieve this goal that we've set out to achieve, which sort of deep down most people believe is about delivering a better functioning world for humanity and improving things. Ultimately, that's what we all thought we were doing. The vast majority of us, certainly, you know. And then in 2016, that company was sold to a big international consulting firm called EY, formerly known as Ernst and Young. So this is a big audit firm, one of the big four audit and management consultancy firms, and that was a huge change. So we went from kind of 80 people in a little boutique agency in Shoreditch to being part of a huge international organization with, I think, something like 6,000 people in the UK and 250,000 people plus globally, and then we were the sort of shiny bauble in their digital transformation practice, and all of a sudden I was getting visibility of all of the industries at a very senior level. So EY generally specialise at advising people right up to main board and maybe slightly below the main board in big international corporations. And we were getting introduced to discussions and having visibility over what was happening in a huge range of industries, right? Basically all industries have been impacted by this stuff over the past
Hmm.
10 years. So we were getting into a lot of different areas. But then at the same time, was getting a lot of visibility of the transformation of the firm itself. So I actually then got to understand what all the different component parts are of a big international consulting and audit practice like EY, and then how that relates to all of the big international
Hmm.
corporations that are their clients. And that was a fairly unique experience, right? I don't think that there would have been a time when anyone, certainly at the age that I was at, because we're talking sort of early to mid 30s when this was going on, would have been in those rooms, listening to those
Hmm.
conversations and having visibility of all the different component parts of how this whole thing fits together. Yeah, and we're
Hmm.
talking about the global economic system and all the different component parts, all the cogs, all the pieces, and how those kind of correlate and interact with each other in order to deliver what it is that these big companies do. Then I started to reject this at quite a deep level in around sort of 2018, 2019, and I became very disenchanted with what was happening, not just in my professional life. I had a big sort of life shift generally, very significant relationship that I was in came to an end. The some sort of personal things that had been simmering away under the surface came to a head, in a number of different ways. I won't talk about that too much right now. There's a whole other podcast. But then also, I think that there was a sense inside me that something, an unease, basically. I couldn't put my finger on it. Couldn't quite work out what it was. And then, so I was out of the consulting game, and then and then was sort of bouncing around between sort of doing different things, trying to work out what I wanted to do. I actually wanted to get into music because I'd always been
Okay.
involved in music, and basically I'd lined up a an event series and had venues lined up, and they've had a whole plan. Which again, we could do another whole big long conversation
Do you
about.
play or sing or was
DJ,
it
but I'm DJ
okay?
and,
Okay.
and club
Hey.
promoter, yeah, for a long time. And I was
Mhm.
doing that when I was working professionally, right?
Okay.
So that was so I was still doing it, and I was like, hang on, well, I'm still doing this thing, so maybe this is the thing that I should be doing. So I left my sort of corporate job and I was going to double down on music and really get into that. And then basically, and I'd finally kind of got out of the corporate world in sort of January 2020, and then in
Wow,
March
timing.
everything shut down. Exactly, yeah. So
Timing
like,
is
couldn't
everything.
it couldn't have been the worst. It couldn't have been worse timing. But it's put me in a really interesting position basically because I had all
Mm,
of this knowledge from was that sort of 16 17 years of working in the corporate game, but then was outside of it,
mm,
and I clocked very quickly that the lockdown and particularly when you got into the latter stages of it and the vaccine rollout and that kind of thing. I was like, hang on a minute, this is
madness
extreme.
personified.
Yeah, it is. Yes, this is ludicrous, basically,
Mm,
and particularly, and all the censorship and everything, and the fact that this was all being coordinated globally, and it was just it was ludicrous, made absolutely no sense at all, and the fact that they were breaking the scientific process,
mhm,
like literally,
mm.
like in terms of
Redefining words and yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
yeah, exactly. Well, just basic things like you can't do a long-term safety test
mm.
you can't gather long-term safety data in a short period of time. That's literally impossible. So
Hmm.
it
What do
doesn't
you
matter how
mean?
many times
Yeah,
you
yeah.
doesn't matter how many times you tell us that you can.
Hmm.
It's not you can't break the laws of the universe. So
Hmm.
what's happening here exactly? and also particularly because of what I understood about the digital systems, and particularly as this was as it related to the health system,
Hmm.
and the fact that if you put all of these different component pieces together, what you've effectively created, and mea culpa, what I was helping to create, I then subsequently realised, because a lot of what we've been doing professionally was about laying the groundwork for this thing to come in, was a single integrated digital control grid, which I've previously called a global concentration camp, because that's what it is basically. Because once these digital systems are fully deployed, they've already been built, by the way, so these things already exist. It's just they haven't been fully deployed yet. Essentially, what that means is that they can control your ability to move, to communicate, to transact in the market, to access information, to think. Ultimately, it's a total centralized
Sort of hive
control system.
mind creation. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
With
and
geofence people and
you mentioned Palantir earlier, and Palantir is one of the it's essentially the operating systems, the
mm,
way I think about it, for this totalitarian control grid, and that sits right at the heart of the NHS, amongst other things. It's
mhm.
being used all over the place, but like the NHS is running on Palantir, and Palantir are also, doing things like selecting kill targets for the IDF or the Ukrainian military, or whatever it might be. So it's really it's dirty business. When you understand it in its totality. And what I saw happening in 2020, like, really, that was just a brutal wake up call. Basically, it's like, wow, this is
They
I
actually
hadn't.
intend to apply all of this technology to the human race and
Yes,
and everybody is going to be captured within this net, and it's going to happen before they even realize that it's happened. um,
yeah,
you remind me a little bit, a friend of mine called Cindy Niles, who's she's as smart as you are. You'd love each other. And you can find her on Facebook. She came across a man called Aman Jabi, and I'm not sure if you will have come across him either, but he was working in Silicon Valley and he had a similar experience to you. Obviously, you're both unique and won't be at all the same, really. But on the other hand, he also felt that he was building part of the surveillance grid and
mm,
that he needed to step away and tell people that this was what was going on. So
right.
2020, you realize, okay, this is horrific. Um, what did that prompt you to do?
Well, I'll tell you what else happened, right? And this was really good. So I described how the music thing obviously kind of fell apart. Although I kept in with that, so I was doing a lot of music stuff through the lockdowns and working with artists and doing
With
live streaming.
1980s warehouse secret venue experiences, or no? It would have been
No,
good though. I would have gone to one. That would have
I
been
did it.
brilliant.
Well, it wasn't. Do you know what? I wasn't doing live events, but I was doing live streaming.
Mhm,
And basically, because there's so many artists based in London, and because of all of the clubs shut down, and all of a sudden there's loads of artists around, and
mhm.
with not a lot of
Nowhere
work
to
on.
play.
So it's like, okay, well, I'm here, and so I got to do some really cool stuff. But then basically, after about, can't remember exactly when it was, probably sort of, God dear, probably 6, 8 months, something like that. After the lockdown began, I began to, because I needed to work and get some money in as much as anything. Like, I got, through some of my old contacts, I picked up a couple of freelance contracts and was doing some consulting work. And one organization in particular specialized in what they call AI ethics.
Oh wow, I
And
didn't know they existed. There you go.
well, yeah, quite.
Sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? But anyway,
Yeah,
carry on.
well, this is sort of lipstick on a pig thing. But they were working with some, well, they were, first of all, they were acknowledged leaders in that field,
Mhm.
and actually they'd been helping big tech companies deploy AI, particularly in kind of highly regulated environments for quite some time. So they helped with the first AI deployment into the NHS, for example, back in, I think it was 2016. So they were right on the cutting edge of this stuff.
Mhm.
And basically, they wanted some help with how they went to market, who to sell to, how to sell, all that kind of stuff. So joined them on a contract and then started getting introduced to the most astonishing range of people, right? So I mentioned that I'd already had sort of quite senior exposure, board level exposure at big companies. Well, this organization, because it was right on the money of a very, very hot topic and had a track record of doing this kind of work, was getting into, I mean, literally the top banks in the city of London, some of the huge infrastructure companies around the UK, big airport operators, industrials companies, people who make jet engines. And one organization in particular, which was a very, very strange organization, which is part of the NHS actually, or not. It's a private company which is owned by the current serving health secretary. So it has one shareholder, and that's the current serving health secretary. It's a really weird way of constituting an organization, which is, controlled ultimately by the Department of Health or the person running the Department of Health, but it's run not as part of the NHS, it's run as a private company. It's called Genomics England. And basically, what they've been doing is building a big data platform to store the genetic codes, the DNA sequences of the whole British population. And then the assumption would be, because they're playing the kind of big tech global platform game, is that they would want to scale that up to be, you know, a global data structure. So essentially, every man, woman, and child alive would have
Sometimes
their
actually blows my mind, what we're talking about these days, because it's like, are we really having this conversation? Because I
yeah,
believe
right.
you thoroughly and completely understand that you are telling the truth. And yet at the same time, I find it absolutely mind-blowing that
Yeah.
that could be the case. I'm actually talking to somebody who worked with people whose intention is to record all the, obviously for benign and benevolent purposes, the DNA of everybody in the world. It's madness. Sorry. Anyway, carry on. So
No, no, no.
you're looking at it and you're,
It is madness, and so basically, I was having these so I had two before. It's called Genomics England, by the way. I
mm,
don't remember
you
if I
did.
said that, and but it's part of a whole what they call a biotechnological industry, which they're describing as kind of the health system of the future. It's like, no, we really don't need this. We don't need these technology platforms which are storing the whole DNA structure of humanity so that the British government can sell access to pharmaceutical companies so that they can run AI algorithms over it in order to create novel pharmaceuticals for profit. Like,
Mhm.
it's disgusting in
That
every.
will keep people, either seriously unwell or marginally unwell in order for it to continue in its existence. It is kind of it's very clever. It's self-fulfilling. And it is, if you look at it objectively, it's very clever, but it completely lacks any kind of humanity. And you said you came to this through AI ethics, and ethics seem to have just gone out the window, in the last 5, 8 years. There's no should
Mm.
we. It is all we can, therefore we will. Um, uh,
Yes.
anyway, sorry, carry on. Sorry, I
No,
get so
no.
like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it, but I do, I
Well,
really
no,
do.
no, it's no, don't be sorry. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's we can, therefore we will is the mentality basically, and that's why I started to really fall out with what was happening because I was like, well, hang on a minute, you're talking to us about ethics, but then we're posing you questions about actually like ethical questions.
Mhm.
You'll you're pushing back on us essentially. And there's a lot of talk about trust, right? So, well, we need people to trust us. It's like, okay, well, are you doing something? Should they trust you? Is the
Yeah, like,
question.
are you trustworthy?
Exactly.
I mean, that's a good place to start if you want
Exactly.
people to
It's like
trust you.
what's actually going on back then, and then when you begin to understand that, and then so this was sort of April, May time, 2021, and then the whole sort of RNA vaccinate the country thing was
Mhm.
happening. Matt Hancock was, up in Parliament giving his big speeches, and I remember just sitting there thinking, hang a minute, I'm massively anti this thing, and yet I'm sitting here having a conversation with you people, and I
Mhm.
actually could not believe that this was happening. It's like,
Mhm.
well, how have I ended up sitting in this
Mhm.
chair
Mhm.
talking to you about this? Like, and anyway.
It's a kind of dissonance, though, isn't it? Like, you cannot, you couldn't have maintained it indefinitely because it is two completely different, you
Yeah.
know, yeah, like you either believe this or you believe in that. And
Yes. Well, it's quite. It's a yes. Will you tolerate evil or
Mhm.
not? Because I view what they're doing, and they're still doing it now, by the way. Like that thing's bigger than it was when I was
Yeah,
talking. This is 4 years down the track. Like they're still plowing money into it. They've just announced a few months ago that they're now going to be taking DNA
all the
samples
babies.
at birth, and
Mhm.
that which is ultimately
It's
the
just
goal, right?
absolutely
No,
horrifies.
it's
It's
disgusting.
just
Yeah, but again, this is
horrifying.
all presented as, oh well, but then we
Look
can
for
for
genetic defects.
exactly, yeah. So we can predict that you might have X, Y, Z, whatever it might be, disease at some point in the future. So we can swoop in and we can intervene with that and we can stop that from happening. But
Mhm.
that's how they talk about
Like
it. But
predictive policing, but it's predictive,
yes,
you know, um, well, yes.
and it's all based on these RNA technologies, right? Because it's ultimately it's genetic engineering. And we very quickly, this is one of the other things I remember thinking at the time. Like, I was like, "Hang on a minute, we don't allow genetically engineered food into the food supply, but now you're talking about genetically engineering people. We seem to have missed a few steps here, right? But it's just like this whole kind of process was just crazy. And then so basically, I bounced out of there because I was like, I can't do this. And it was tearing me to pieces. And
Good for
then
you.
and
Just,
then um,
good for you though. Good for you. We
thank
need
you.
good people. We do. We need. That's why I'm talking to you. That's why I want to share you because
Mm.
we need good people. It's time to stand up, you know.
Yes, yeah, well, that's certainly true. Yeah, we do. And it is time to stand up, right? The clock is ticking, and it's later than you think. Um, but I kind of sat on that for a couple of years, to be honest with you, because part of me, well, first of all, I didn't really know how to explain it because it's a quite an obscure and technical thing, right? That we were talking about, and also this was in the context of that full-on propaganda onslaught that we were all being subjected to in the midst of this vaccination program, right? And no one really understood what RNA technology was. No one really understood what genomics was, and and also I was just kind of like just completely sideswiped
Right.
by the
Yeah.
whole thing, and I had to just sort of get out of there and just try and work out what the hell was going on, basically. And then I carried on just doing bits and pieces of work in the background, and I had a sort of anonymous Telegram channel that I was running that I was putting bits of information out on, but it was not run with as much conviction as it could have been or should have been at the time. And then, fast forward,
You
basically,
tried.
well, yeah, I did try a bit. But fast forward a couple of years and I was still sort of doing contract work with people, but my heart wasn't in it basically, So I was doing work with people, and it was similar to what I'd been doing previously. It was like app development and digital transformation, but really deep down in my soul, I was like, actually, we do not need this,
Mhm.
and um And actually, I think we need to head back in the other direction. So my ultimate endpoint, I think, is that, you know, potentially we might even need to turn off the internet, right? That's kind of where my head's at now. You know, I'm not next week,
It's
but
such a shame because it's potential for good. There is a lot of potential there for, like the fact that we can talk to each other. It's beautiful, potentially beautiful technology, but we clearly cannot control ourselves. And therefore, we may well need to get rid of the phones and get rid of the laptops. And, if it's the only way to save the children, and they're watching us, they are watching us all the time,
oh
and
yeah,
we're not doing it yet, you know because we don't, I suppose, presumably because we don't know what that looks like or feels like, because except some of us do, because we were born before sort
yeah,
of 1990
we all
something.
know. Like literally, this is the thing. The internet is a very very new thing. You say that to people, like, well, we might have to turn off the internet. They're like, well, how would anything work? It's like, well, how did
Mm,
anything work before?
mhm.
You know,
I remember
it's
working for an IT magazine, and they were I knew nothing about IT. It was really, really awkward. But anyway, they were uh talking about e-commerce. So that gives you the time frame around about and what they really meant was just selling stuff online. And I remember the phrase being so clunky, and people using it all the time, and businesses trying to transform, as you've spoken about. And you're absolutely right. There was a world before it, and it felt uncomfortable being forced to make the shift into it in the first place.
yeah, exactly. Um, and so I basically I decided in sort of February, March 2023 that I was gonna basically go all in and blow the whistle on that genomics program. That was the first thing that I wanted to do because like I've got this thing sitting in my head that people just have to know this. And also at that point, 2 years down the track, there was a lot of data that had already come out from the health system itself about what the actual impact of that COVID pandemic, pseudo
Mm,
pandemic, had been, and all the things that had happened on the back of it, right? So there was a lot more information around that backed up the case that it was a scam, right? Without getting into all of the detail around it, because again, we sit here all day talking about why and the many and varied ways in which it was a scam, and also the enormous unthinkable amount of damage that has been
mm,
done through the policies that were brought in on the back of it. But the basically felt that the territory was a bit more uh, it was a bit more it was the time was right
mm.
basically to actually stand up and say something. So I got in touch with a guy called James Delingpole, who you may be familiar with.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
James
Well, I don't
Delingpole.
know him personally, but I know of him, and I know
Yeah,
people who know him, and I see him on Twitter, which we have to dispense with. But anyway,
yeah. Well, so basically, James does a great podcast series and was delving into some pretty out there topics. I was like, and I just there was something about him that I quite liked. He had a bit of humour to him. So basically, I got in touch with him. I was like, look, I've got this thing. I need to talk to you about it. And basically, his words were he took a punt on me. And I did that interview in it came out. We did it at the end of March 2023. Came out, I think, the first week of April 2023, and then that just blew up. Basically, I think it's had probably the thick end of 1 million listens so far. I think they had it was about 500,000 within sort of 3 months, 6 months of it
so it'll
going
be a
out.
million and one, and potentially more, hopefully,
Yeah, well, yeah,
after this
well,
conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, actually, it's becoming more difficult to find because it's not on Spotify,
Oh,
and
okay.
actually, so I reshared it on my Substack recently
In
because like,
that
well,
weird world in which we exist,
which
and
is one of the
yeah,
things again, it's one of the things about the internet. It's like, hang on a minute, all of
where's
these
it
things could be
gone?
deleted. So
Mm.
where's your actual solid long-term repository of information? It's like, that's interesting, isn't it? So basically, we had that discussion that went pretty nuts, and then at that moment, I burnt all my bridges professionally, like this, and I really went to town on a bunch of people that I used to work with, and talked about the role of the big consulting firms in delivering this World Economic Forum
Must have been terrifying.
Great Reset agenda. It wasn't terrifying, no.
Just ready to tell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was pretty much just. I was kind of. I needed to get it off my chest at that point, to be honest with
Mm,
you.
mm.
Well, maybe it was a bit terrifying. The one thing I probably should have done a lot better a job of at the time, and actually even up until today, really recently, is actually like distributing that information better and taking it to people um that I know. But because of the particularly the sort of COVID situation, there's a lot of people who went along with it and they took the jabs and all that kind of stuff. It's like it was really hard
Very,
to
very
just
difficult. And
sort
you're
of.
very hard on yourself. I mean, what you achieved is amazing. To tell the truth at that particular point was very, very hard. It's still
Mm.
hard, and generally, you have no idea what the reception might be. You also don't want to hurt people, which is a very tricky one,
Yeah, well, that's
You
that's the
care about people, it's human, and that's what we're trying to say. So it makes
yes,
perfect sense. It'd be a difficult thing to do.
yes, yeah. I think yeah, you don't want to hurt people. I think and yeah, I think that was a big part of it. Um. So anyway, that's a very long way of telling you how I came across UK column because I already
I'm
knew.
so pleased. Thank
Yes.
you. I'm glad to know it. So now we haven't quite got there yet, though. So we haven't got to
Well,
the bit where somebody emailed you, or who was it, or how did that happen?
I got in touch with them. So I did this interview, and I was sitting there going, okay, well, how am I going to live, basically?
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
knew I needed to spread the message further out and connect with like-minded people. And um, I so I got in touch with UK Column. I knew their stuff. Didn't know it super well, but there were certainly people I was aware of, and I basically went to their website, sent them an email, and said, "Look, I've just done this interview. Um, I think there was a news story had just come out where IBM and Moderna had just signed an agreement to use AI to develop new pharmaceuticals, and I was just like, this is hideous, and this is exactly what I've just been talking about. And UK column, do you want to have a discussion? So I did an interview with a guy called David Scott, who was one of the main presenters at the time, and then that went well. Did a couple more, three more interviews over the summer. And then basically an opportunity came up to go on the news, and I got chucked in the mix, asked to do it. I'd never done a live broadcast before.
What was it
It was
like?
uh, pretty terrifying because, well, actually, so one of the things so I used to have a phobia of speaking on camera, so I really couldn't talk on camera. Um, I just kind of used to seize up, and it was really funny because I could talk to a room full of people, and I mean a lot of people. So actually, I'd done things professionally where I've spoken to like 500 people in a room on a stage, and most people find that terrifying. But actually, ironically, I could do that. But then actually, as soon as you turn the camera on, then I kind of get really self-conscious and not be able to speak and that kind of thing. So I had to really sort of break down a lot of sort of phobias in order to.
Frightening. It's frightening. I found it frightening. I remember
Yes.
the first person that I interviewed. I was terrified and shaking, and not. You're supposed to be making them feel comfortable, and of course, it's not in person, but people pick up on all sorts of cues. And if you're trying to report the news and it's live, then it's not just yourself, but it's other people. I'm sorry, the cat is trying to involve conversation. This is Rafiki. Rafiki, not now, sweetheart. Okay, sorry, baby. It's really professional. And here in the studio, we have Rafiki, which is Swahili for friend. And he's, well, sometimes friendly. Um,
Well, he's a
and
cat.
but he's a good cat. He's my cat, and I love him. Sorry, so we got sidetracked. It's actually very frightening, and well done, especially live, and other people are depending on you. So it's not just, whether or not your delivery is as good as you would like it to have been. It's, that you need to pass between people, and you need to,
Yeah.
exchange the correct pleasantries and give the right introductions. And yeah, so well done.
And the timing's a big thing, and you know that's something that will always be a development point for me. I think is the term that they use, right? So anyway, I
When
started
you
in
say
it,
that, when you mean the timing is a big thing, give me an example just so that I understand what you mean. Like
actually
the timing.
delivering a segment of the agreed length of time.
Right, got
So
you.
it's
Okay,
like
sorry.
that. So you get 6 minutes to do this. It needs to be 6 minutes long because if it's not six
Okay.
minutes long, then there's a knock-on effect on the next segment and then the whole show basically. So actually getting
Do you
things,
rehearse?
um, not, probably not as much as I should do actually. But no, the we don't really rehearse per se. But I will do a sort of run through and get a rough time, and
Mm,
then I'm pretty good at sticking to it. It's always important to strike the balance between being fully prepared, but then also making it feel natural. It's like one of the things I think people like about UK column is that it doesn't feel like a fully scripted TV show. You know,
hmm
it's like
hmm
actually no, we're here, and
hmm
we're not completely ad-libbing, you
hmm
know, but there's an element of it which isn't pre-planned, and I think that's quite important because you know
Really important
people want
because, yeah.
real, they don't want
Uh-huh,
fake, so
uh-huh.
we give them real.
We've had years of fake,
Yes,
inauthentic, manufactured nonsense,
yeah, yeah,
soundbite. Really, people do need other people who have, who are knowledgeable in their subject area, and who are willing to share their understanding of whatever it is, in the way that the UK column does. It makes people feel less alone. I
yeah,
really would thoroughly recommend that if you don't already sort of go and visit them, do go and spend some time on their website and do listen to their news podcasts. You will feel less alone. It's very important, and it's horrible that the only way to do that is through this medium, which we need to dismantle, which may be part of why it's difficult to think of dismantling it, because some of the few comforts at the moment actually come via that ability to be less alone. But anyway, so there you are. You're a news, and that was the beginning. They asked you back regularly, or
that was it. I was every week. It was straight in. So basically, I did my
oh,
first one. That was good. And actually, one of the things that I did do well was the timing. And I remember Mike going like that. I can't remember what he said. It was like that was perfect. I was like, okay, cool. Well, here
happy.
I am. And then next thing you know, I was doing every Friday, and that was it. And I've done it every week since. Basically, like I don't think I've missed one. Actually, no, I don't think I've missed one. I think I've done a news every single week.
Well, they have the good
For
sense to
coming up to
know a
two
good thing
years.
when they see it. You know,
Well,
that's it. They do, they do. It's an extraordinary team of people that you're working with at the moment.
yeah,
Thank goodness for all of you. Because
yes,
the places, in terms of actually I mean, some of the topics you have to deal with are horrific.
yeah.
Obviously Gaza comes up sort of immediately and right to the surface, but then even the underlying intent behind some of the, say, sort of less obviously kind of immediate atrocities. A lot of the topics that you're having to deal with, unfortunately, at the moment, are sincerely horrific. And so the fact that there is some humor brought to it, as you said, if you don't laugh, you're going to cry. How do you cope with that though? Because you seem to be somebody, it must be great to be on track with your soul and what you believe in, but you are having to sort of look straight on at, awful things all the time.
How do I deal with that? Um, I don't know. I get asked this from time to time, and I don't really have an answer for it, to be honest with you. It's just like I just seem to be able to separate myself from.
Better to be looking at what's really going on than to try and
Well,
live in any other world.
well, I think the main thing for me is actually when and I learnt this from sort of personal development is that what in order to like affect any kind of positive transformational change in your own life and as an extension of that in the world around you, you have to really grapple with reality. You know what's actually happening. And if you're not doing that, then you're going to get battered around by, you know, the winds of fortune, misfortune, whatever is actually going on that you're ignoring. And once you begin to really grapple with the reality of the situation,
Mhm.
then you actually begin to take responsibility and ultimately ownership over what's happening, and you begin to develop a sort of agency and the ability to um to control the way that things are developing, basically. And I'm not saying that I'm sort of here wrestling the global totalitarian system to the ground on my own or anything like that, but it's like you have to acknowledge the problem in order to deal with it. It's the
Mhm.
short way of saying what I've just said.
Mhm.
And that gives you a sense of power and agency that
Mhm.
is actually really encouraging ultimately, and I think a lot of people, they feel scared but also they feel powerless,
Mhm.
basically. And actually the first step towards taking back control for yourself is by grappling with what's going on. And luckily for me, because of my professional background and 15 plus years analyzing the markets and understanding these complex systems and how they operate, and how all the different component parts fit together, and what the incentives are, and the roles of the different bits of the system and that kind of thing. Like I had a very good training for what I'm doing now. I didn't understand it as that at the time, and I was deploying that knowledge and that capability for a different purpose. But it stood me in very good stead, basically, to be able to come in and comment on it, and then also to importantly take my understanding of the corporate system and then begin to apply it to these other complex systems that are being used to control us, which are the particularly the international governance systems like the UN and that kind of thing, and the whole apparatus of the UN, right? And people think about the United Nations. Generally, they think about the UN General Assembly in New York, where all these people rock up and they give their big speeches, and there's kind of this big, isn't fantastic global consensus about what's going on. Actually, if you look at the UN and what it actually is, like all of the interconnected component parts of it, it's a sprawling global empire, right?
Mhm.
A
Mhm.
completely parallel governance system that is on a par with the global economy in some ways in terms of its complexity. So beginning to be able to analyze that, and I didn't even know that existed. Before joining UK Column, I didn't know there was a UN system, and most people don't,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I
right?
remember my listeners or anybody that is listening may have heard me say this before, but I grew up in Kenya, and I remember one of our field trips was quite a privileged little school, and we were taken to the United Nations headquarters in
Mm,
Nairobi as a field trip. And this was what, probably the early 1990s. And I mean, in terms of the technology that was available at the time, and certainly in terms of the kind of infrastructure buildings that you could put together at around about that time, it was an impressive place. And I remember, I think we got with a cinematic lecture on the ozone layer and CFCs and how we were all going to die because
mm,
of the ozone, the hole in the ozone layer. But you had to pass through one of the biggest slums in Nairobi to get to this complex if you were driving to it from our school. And that slum is still there, only bigger, and
right.
the just as a very, so I remember as a child even understanding, people are giving their money presumably to this organization so that they will spend it on, helping people with sanitization and irrigation and roofs, and food. And yet here we are, and the justification for this major complex seems to be that, so that people can come and talk and share ideas, and that that's somehow going to benefit the world. But it that was my first insight into the UN and how it operates. When you're talking about a system that people don't know about, would you elaborate on that a wee bit?
Yeah. So the if you look at, I've got actually one second. Let me go and grab
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
good.
I actually have. Hopefully, I can put my hands on it relatively easily. The um the um oh, here it is. So this is the organizational structure of the UN. You going to be able to see that?
A little bit blurry.
Yeah, it's a bit blurry. Hold on a minute. Let me change my. There we go. We've got all the functions on my camera for some reason. There you go.
Oh, clever.
So you can download that. This
Okay.
this is
All
just from
right.
this is just from their website basically.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the General Assembly at the top, and um that is the kind of the High Commission, like the Central Commission that sits in New York. And then all of the different component parts that sit under that, whether that's relating to human rights or international law or disarmament or um, education,
Mm-hmm.
um, all of those different things. And then within that, there's something called the UN Development Program, which I'm particularly interested in at the minute. 'Cause essentially, what they're doing is they are promoting through their Sustainable Development Goals program the wholesale global transformation of all political, economic, and cultural systems everywhere on Earth in order to align with this centralized um, UN system. And that's all been driven out of the General Assembly and the UN Development Program in New
Mm-hmm.
York. And they have representatives in every country on Earth, and they are interested in every single component part of what goes into making up a modern society.
Mm-hmm.
You've then got below that the Security Council, which obviously deals with things like terrorism, global conflict, peacekeeping. They call it peacekeeping. It's like there's, the one thing that the UN peacekeepers are most notorious for is sexually abusing women and children when they go into countries, right? It's like, and that I think to me tells you everything you need to know about the UN, right? So they say they're there for peacekeeping, but actually they're going to rape your kids, right? And you can pretty much apply that to everything that they do. And then they've got Economic and Social Council, and then, they talk about the fact that they're interested in crime prevention and criminal justice and reducing narcotics use and social development, elevating the status of women, all of these kind of
Mm-hmm.
touchy-feely nice things that actually, when you look at how they actually manifest and what the sort of downstream implications of what they're doing is that it makes, like most government, when they say they're trying to fix something, they end up making the problem worse while at the same time chewing up loads of money and resources. And
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing is completely backwards, basically. And they have a full global program essentially to lobby and influence national governments to dictate policy. They've got organizations like the World Health Organization, which is set
Mm-hmm.
up under the auspices of the UN. They've got the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So essentially, they dictate, what isn't true as it relates to what they call climate change. And then also all of the policies that have to be adopted internationally in response to this supposed crisis that they've actually cooked up. And even just that one thing, the IPCC and the climate change agenda, that is driving forward a total wholesale transformation of the global economic system,
Economy.
new
Yeah.
energy systems, new forms of human habitation, the urbanization of everything, new transportation infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
and this
Crazy,
is
isn't it?
it's everything,
It's
literally
it's
everything, right?
it's
And
how
that and
people.
that and that and that
Yeah.
goes and that goes right the way down to what's being discussed at your local council. So actually, one of the
Mm-hmm.
things we do a lot of at UK Column, certainly recently, is, you know, the UN is sort of it's kind of up in the stratosphere, and it's difficult, you know, and it's completely undemocratic. They talk about
Mhm.
democracy all the time, but no one ever voted for any of the people who
Mhm.
work at the
Mhm.
UN,
Mhm.
you know. Another sort of classic inversion of
Mhm.
meaning that these people love. But if you want to understand how that manifests, and you want to understand how you can actually stop this thing in its tracks, then you've got to go and look at what's happening in your local council, because
Mhm.
all of the local council, I mean, not all necessarily, but like a huge number of local councils back in sort of 2019, 2020 time, they just sort of unilaterally declared a climate crisis or a climate emergency, and then that as the necessary response to this emergency is the implementation of these new energy systems, you know, flogging off prime farmland to build solar farms. I mean, just the most absurd, ludicrous, self-defeating,
Mhm.
suicidal policies,
Mhm.
basically, that none of these people are qualified to actually make a decision on. Like all of that stuff's been driven out of the UN
Mhm.
and disseminated down through this bureaucratic infrastructure on the political side of things. And but then on the flip side of it, and I talked earlier about money and power, and like that runs all the way up to the top of the system. So UN is power, but then
Mhm.
money is the World Economic Forum. And the
Mhm.
UN and the World Economic Forum signed an agreement back in June 2019 to establish a global public-private partnership where a very, very select group of multinational corporations who make up the World Economic Forum system. So essentially, it's about 1,100 companies globally are going to be the ones that get to participate in the new market that has been established on the back of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So the UN issues a bunch of diktats about the way that the future is going to be, and then these big international corporations come in, and they're the ones that get to build the new future and make billions, potentially
Mhm.
trillions for their investors in order to enact the policy. And that's actually the technical definition of fascism. It's part of the definition of fascism as set out by Mussolini. He called it corporatism because it's a merger of state and corporate power. And that goes from the top level, as above, so below, right? As they say.
Mhm.
So at the top level, it's the UN and the World Economic Forum, but then that drives all the way down the system from global to regional to national to local
Mhm.
governance, and then
Yeah.
back up again, right? And that's literally what's happening in the
Every
country,
community, like you,
everywhere.
it's here in my village, which is
Yeah, yeah.
ridiculous. You know, when you see some of these things that you've talked about and that you've tried to share with people as sort of abstract concepts about
Mm.
3 or 4 years ago or 2 or 3 years ago, and you see them suddenly arrive in your
They're beginning to
in the
get it
place where
now.
you live. Yeah, it's
People are beginning to get it now. Which is encouraging. I mean, there's still a lot of chaos and confusion to come. That's certainly the case. But I've been having conversations with people that over the past couple of months that would have been completely unthinkable even a year ago, actually.
And is that
Um,
because you are who you are now and you do what you do, or is it because you like you really detect that there's a wider openness to listening and understanding, and maybe that people actually see certain elements even if they don't see it all?
I think probably a combination of the two, and it's impossible for me to say
Mhm.
really. But yeah, and it will be different person to person,
Depending
right?
on the
But
person.
it feels like there's a sea change, and I don't just think it's because I've been sitting on the UK column for 2 years. I
Mhm.
think there's something else going on, and
I hope
it's
you're right.
actually this sort of broader breakdown people are seeing across society, and actually they're beginning to play it out a bit and go, oh, hang on a minute. Because things are getting undeniably worse and more chaotic, and there's a whole bunch of stuff going, like this sort of escalating civil strife and the
Mhm.
sort of just
Absolutely. At the moment, that sort of analogy of the black and red ants in the jar who are happily going about
yes.
their business, and then you give it a good shake and see what happens,
Mm,
and they get frightened, they attack each other,
yeah.
and but it's so good to hear somebody who is knowledgeable say that they think that there might be progress towards things, more people understanding. Do you think this is going to turn out okay?
Yes,
Oh,
it has
right.
to.
Okay. Okay, right. By sheer bloody mindedness because I mean my neighbor is just a wonderful gardener. And he understands fully what's going on. I'm very, very lucky to live to be a neighbor because it's a lot of people are very alone with their knowledge. And there are not many people in my village who understand what's going on, but he does, and he's a great gardener. And he is, he's preparing for the worst, if you like, whilst also having to go about his daily business.
Mm.
Do you think that so you said you think it is going to be okay. He survives. Sorry, that was the link by sheer bloody mindedness. I it's almost like I sometimes wonder for men if it's different from women. Obviously, not allowed to say that, or you weren't in the 1980s. You sort of seem to be able to say it now. But I, I can be quite bloody minded, and I have been in the past about things that I believe in. If I think that something's wrong or I think that something's right, think something that there is inherent value in something being done a certain way, then I would have tried to walk that path, regardless of what the consequences are. But I find that in this circumstance, where everywhere that I look around me, these awful things are happening, that thing that I used to have inside me that would just be, right, okay, well, you want me to die, so I'm not going to. Men that I've encountered who seem to understand what's going on seem to be sort of applying that sort of I will survive because survival in itself, in and of itself, is I don't know there that you will not defeat me. I don't know if it's a man thing. Like I will not give in. I will not be dominated. I will not. I'll go down fighting. And I don't know, as a female, I'm struggling with it a little bit more than the men that I meet. Perhaps that's another podcast for
Mm.
women and men to talk together. Um, uh,
Yes. So, well, I look, so there's, it's not just a sort of, uh, rebellious statement that you won't take me down type thing, right? Although that's part of it, and having that kind of attitude does help. There's
mhm.
two things about this that actually tell me that ultimately, in the not too distant future, the whole thing that they're trying to do is going to collapse. And the first one is that the system that they're trying to implement is it's too complicated, right? So it's actually not technically feasible to implement a single integrated central control grid for everything that exists in creation. Like, just
You
put
would have
aside
thought
the
that they would think that in the beginning, that this is not possible, but they're trying so hard.
well,
So
they think
that's
they think they're gods, right? So they think that they're essentially, and with these systems like Palantir, for example, like they essentially do think that they are becoming omnipotent and omniscient, right? They think they're elevating themselves to the level of the creator himself, right? So they do think that, but actually, it's laughable, really, how crude what they've created is in the context of what it is that they're trying to control. They're so far away that it's impossible to describe, right? So actually, the technological feasibility of doing what they're trying to do it's just not possible to do that. Putting aside the fact that you shouldn't want to do it, you actually can't do it, right? You can cause a lot of damage while in the process of trying to do it, but actually you're going to fail ultimately. And then the other thing is that the human component, they're reliant on people who are fundamentally corrupt, right? And the further up the top of this pyramid that they're in, and it is a pyramid, the more corrupt the people are. And corrupt people are not reliable people. Like they are extremely unreliable. They're corrupt. Yeah, they can be compromised, and they're motivated by power and money, and actually the best people are not motivated by those things, and they're not compromisable, and people on this side of the fence are in that camp, right? You know, we're not here for wealth and power and fame, whereas on the other side of the fence they are, and that makes them weaker people ultimately, and their entire system is populated by people like that. You know, so they got a technology problem, they got a people problem, and then the other thing that I'm starting to see now, and actually there was an amazing experience on a bus in South London, you know, because one of the things that they're doing across all Western nations, but you know, we'll just talk about this country for now, is that they're using mass immigration as a weapon essentially by bringing in millions of people who aren't from this country in order to destabilize and displace and replace ultimately the native populations, and then they'll do the same thing to those people that they brought in. You know, like the idea that they favor them particularly. They don't favor them. They're just using them as a tool in this battle they're waging against the mass of humanity. Right?
Right.
You okay?
Yeah, it's really nice to hear someone who knows what they're talking about say it's gonna be okay. Sorry.
That's all right.
No, I understand completely. The people who are being brought into the country, it's no more their fault than it is our fault what's going on. And
No,
we don't hate them, and they don't. Well, I mean, it's complicated because, of
it's
course, there are
very complicated.
people who are not just people. There are obviously people who are troops, which is a slightly different issue. It's such a complex issue, and it's very, very clever, isn't it, to do it that way because it makes it very, very difficult for a person to tread um, in amongst it and speak about it without causing hurt or offense. Anyway, sorry, carry on. So it's all going to be okay because they brought all these people into the country, and how
Well,
how is that going to work out all right?
well, it's causing chaos, right? So that's certainly true. Um, and you know, as I said a minute ago, there's the potential for an enormous amount of damage to be caused as this whole thing progresses and ultimately collapses, which it will do. But one of the things that I don't think that they've accounted for, and they certainly don't know how to manage, is the fact that there are people, and I was on a bus in South London, and there are Africans, yeah, literal Africans flying Union Jacks, saying that England is for the English,
But
right?
people have a sense of fairness and a sense of love.
Yeah, exactly. They have a
They,
sense of
they,
fairness, and they can
yeah,
see what's going on, and they can see that the system is evil, and actually they're not just dumb immigrants who will just do whatever they're
of
told by the
course.
system. It's like, actually, no, these are decent people, and a lot of them are very God-fearing as well. The Africans in particular, right? And I had an incredible experience a couple of weeks ago on a bus from Brixton back up to London Bridge, and there was a guy on the top deck of a bus, an African guy, African accent, flying Union Jacks, talking to his not talking to his own kind, basically talking to other African men, basically saying, I can't remember the exact term. I think he said England to the sky. It's like England to the sky. England is the greatest. England for the English. And 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 I just sat. I'm actually getting goosebumps talking about it right now because it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. And I was just thought to myself, "Whoa!" And I think this is one of the reasons why they're getting a bit edgy. And actually, one of the things they want to cause civil unrest, and they want to start a war. Because if they start a war, then we're into a whole different territory, and they can really start to lock down on communications, and it's all done in the interest of national security and all that kind of thing. But their ability to actually get us into a hot conflict with like Russia, for example, is that's still a way off. Like they're not going to carry the population that we
Mhm.
just wouldn't have it. Certainly not good. People aren't going to fight for Starmer. Like, why
There
would
was a,
they?
a great deal of resistance to them. They tried to sort of float conscription or they sort
Yeah,
of
right. People
predicted
not having it.
program
And
conscription, and people were not interested at all.
No, exactly.
Um,
They're not having it, and then on the civil unrest side of things, as I said, I've now have direct personal experience of seeing that there are people in I don't know where in Africa he was from, but he was very clearly Afro and had and didn't have a London accent, So it
mhm,
wasn't like he was like a sort of
mhm.
this guy was a recent arrival, and he was saying pro English, England for the English, England to the sky, and he was talking down anyone who disagreed with him, and there were people on the top deck of the bus who were agreeing with exactly what he said, and I was like, oh my
Amazing.
goodness,
Like like, wow.
they can't deal with that, they cannot handle that, and I don't know if they even accounted for it. Right, the idea that actually some of these people that they're bringing over en masse are going to be on our side. It's like, whoa, you can't, they
That's,
lose.
do you know, I don't want to see it happen. It would be so much better if we could just make this stop before that happened. But that would be quite an incredible thing to happen, wouldn't it? For people to stand together and to be smart enough to see,
And we will
that.
do. That's where we're going. That's where we're headed to.
Okay, well, I think that's a really good place to stop because it's just been a beautiful conversation and you have reassured me, but I'm sure that other people listening are just like me and need to hear the same sort of thing because that's at the end of the day, we're not all stupid. A lot of us have been conditioned even by our education in the 1980s, 1990s, women particularly because we were all supposed to be equal, where equal sort of the definition has become, muddled and people don't understand it. But anyway, that was kind of imposed, and we grew up living in our heads. You grew up living in your heads, and you understand that a sensible reaction to the current circumstance would be to go out and plow a field and at least be able to provide for your children if push comes to shove, but
Mm.
you don't have any experience of doing that at all. And you also need to occupy your brain because it is, you know, it, there's a lot of work for people to do if they are to exist outside of, the mental realm that they used to sort of inhabit. We've been sort of divorced from any understanding of religion or God, and kind of encouraged to be very skeptical. And we've been divorced from being practical creatures. And none of those things are beyond us to reclaim, but a lot of people are trying to reclaim them on their own. So I think what we'll do is we'll stop there because I just think that that was so wonderful. And I think that there'll be other people who really needed to hear that too. So
Well, I'm
guys,
glad.
I give you
I'm glad that you found it helpful. And I would just say that it's important for us to have these conversations. And thank you for inviting me. And also, in addition to this, we must get closer to our neighbours, and we must get closer to the land. And the next period of time is going to be increasingly chaotic, and actually it will look superficially like things are going into a complete meltdown, right? Because actually what we're seeing now is that they are trying to accelerate their agenda because they're getting rattled about the fact that things like what I've just described to you are happening and people are really beginning to wake up, and that is going to make things more chaotic, which is going to rattle them further, which is going to make them accelerate the agenda more quickly, and then the whole thing is just going to end up in this kind of vicious cycle as it begins to break down, right? And there's plenty of tricks that they can pull, and also they shouldn't be underestimated, right? I had a conversation with a fantastic guy the other day called Escape Key, who is a sort of savant level genius type substacker, and that's coming out next week on UK Column, and I highly recommend watching that. But his view is that you should never underestimate these people, particularly the people right at the top of the system. Right, they're not stupid. They're extremely intelligent. A lot of them. The kind of middle order types, a lot of the politicians are not. They're not impressive people, and a lot of them are deeply corrupt, like I've talked about. But just keep your eyes open. Um, keep yourself focused on what's in your immediate sphere of influence and ability to control. And we were talking about pol local politics, what's happening with your council, what's happening with the parish council, get involved in that and
I
take
find
back
that hard
control.
as well, though. In the same sort of, I did stuff online, lots of stuff online, and talking online is a lot easier than talking in person. You said it was the opposite way around, but if you're not
For me,
necessarily, yeah, talking about a topic that you know that is not going to be well received, perhaps by a lot of people, that makes it more difficult. And I did try in my local community. There's a local place plan which is being imposed, and it's being imposed all over Scotland. Every area is supposed to produce one. And of course, it just comes straight down from the UN, and
yes,
it's SDG oriented. And
yes,
I tried. I leafleted everybody in the village, and I held a meeting, and I talked to them about this being a top-down initiative rather than grassroots.
yeah,
And
good for
but
you.
I still have to go to the school gates, and I still people who really well-meaning people have put a lot of time and effort into the little component parts, because that's what they do. They break it all down so that people don't realize what it's all about. And
Mm.
so they've been interested in pathways and active travel, and there's other people who are litter picking, and the environment is their predominant concern. And then there's other people who are into I don't know, a heritage. So they break it all down so that everybody thinks it's totally benign. And nobody really, even in the individual groups that are operating, realizes, what the ultimate end game of this is, which is to produce, sort of this homogenous living dwelling space, that it will be the same all over the world. But you try telling people who are well-meaning that perhaps they need to look at the bigger picture here. And that's actually, I don't know, like it, you have to be pretty robust to do it and to take the consequences of it, and then to make any other move. And so I did. I found it very anxiety provoking to live through, knowing that I had upset people, and that they didn't like me. But it's difficult to make yourself put yourself in a position where, I mean, all through life, everybody goes about just trying to be as nice as they can. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people. And so I understand that these are the things that we should be doing, but I don't think that I'll be alone in finding it difficult to do them. Um, but conversations like these will maybe inspire people to understand that, if I can do it, then anybody can do it, because I'm more terrified than any of you of doing something like that. I don't want people, if you it's like implying that people are stupid, and it's just such a terrible people quite understandably don't appreciate that line. And obviously you don't try not to deliver it in that way, but if they're not stupid, which many of them are not, then what they come out of it with is that there is a bigger picture that they didn't notice, and you're pointing it out to them, and therefore you're implying that that they didn't see the bigger picture, which is exactly what you're doing. And it's tough, but have you tried in your local area to do anything? I mean, you're busy, I know, but
So, bits in my local area, but the not public meetings.
mhm. You would be wonderful. I see. I struggle because I understand it all. Well, I don't understand it all, but I understand enough. But I find it, if I write and then I read what I've written, I'm quite happy with that format, because writing is, I'm a little bit better in that space. My ability to put words together, you get to take the time to craft what's in front of you, and then, hopefully it's a better representation of what you're actually thinking than just sort of speaking off the cuff. Some people are brilliant at speaking off the cuff. You're really, really informed. And so, you would be amazing at any kind of public forum, but obviously you have a lot to do. And I wasn't asking you to try and sort of, oh, have you done it? But I would be really, I don't know. I wish I had more courage. And I wish I was more eloquent, because people ask questions and you know the answer and you know where it's derived from, but you're trying to think as quickly as you can. How do you answer that in a way that it's not patronizing and that it is but it's accessible, and everybody just thinks you're crazy anyway, which is never a good platform to start from, but I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling all of these ways, and I really did take comfort from your saying that it will be okay. um and then you went on to say, of course, there'll be absolute chaos before it's okay. But fair enough, because you can't make it not what it is. But I
Yes.
do. I'm glad you think it's going to be okay. Do you think it's going to be okay in our lifetimes?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the children are going to be all right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You're lying, aren't you? And I was just,
Well, look, put it like this. 2030 is a very important symbolic date
yeah.
for these people, right? So, and when they're sort of rushing, it's because they got to hit this date.
Mhm,
Um, and we don't have any deadlines for anything particularly,
mhm,
So, it's going to be an interesting 4, 5 years.
mhm.
Um, but ultimately, at the end of it, I think there's only one outcome.
Well, guys, I give you Ben Rubin. This is why I wanted to give him to you, because I sort of knew that you want to understand, and you want to hear it from somebody who really cares. And as it turns out, he also thinks it's all going to be all right. I mean, what more could you ask for in a human being? Hey.
Yes, and you can help, right?
Hmm.
And you just said that you're not courageous. You're very courageous and you're very eloquent. And also, you must remember that you're not just talking to the people that you're talking directly to. There's also other people listening and watching the whole time, right? And you don't know what impact you're having. You got no idea what impact you're having. Maybe we'll only ever find this stuff out much further down the track, who you actually inspired and what outcomes you help to deliver and
And see, he's also kind. There you go. So, um, and we'll leave it. It's kind of my show, so I get to have the last word.
all right,
So, and
of course.
because you're being awfully kind about me, and I feel that I don't deserve it. I hope retrospectively that there are lots of conversations between lots of nice people about the time in the trenches. And we were actually going to look at First World War poetry, Ben and I. But I'm concerned. I love long form conversations, but I also worry, that people won't hit play because it's gone. They look at it and they think, oh, I don't have time for that conversation right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording, but then I'm going to ask Ben if he'll talk to me again. So we say goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
And yeah, thank you, Ben, so much. That was cool. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
Bye.